Forget the snow globe. The first Christmas was not soft and quiet. It was a battlefield masked as a birth. A dragon crouched beside a cradle. A king sharpened his knives. And the heavens flared with a sign so brazen that foreigners crossed deserts under its glow. The manger sat under a war banner. And Revelation 12 ripped the roof off the nativity to show what really moved in the shadows. A woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, a crown of 12 stars, labor pains that sounded like thunder across the sky. That is how the apocalypse frames the event, not a postcard, a sign, a cosmic announcement. And at the edge of that radiant vision, a dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, and a tail that could rake down a third of the stars, lunged toward a child. The child would rule the nations with a rod of iron. The child would not be swallowed. The child would be caught up to God, beyond the dragon's reach. Earthly shepherds heard angelic songs. Heavenly sentinels saw swords drawn. Meanwhile, a man named Herod reigned in Judea with a smile that never meant safety. He had Roman muscle behind him, and Edomite blood that some in Jerusalem never trusted. He built palaces that climbed hills like fists. Herodium, with its man-made peak, was a monument to his need to tower over everything. He poured marble and money into a temple reconstruction project that turned heads across the empire, and he carved his own name into history with paranoia. Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian, recorded the family carnage. 1 wife dead, several sons dead, courtroom whispers dead. Augustus supposedly mocked him with a quip about pigs and sons. That kind of reputation does not exaggerate easily. Now drop Bethlehem into that world, a hill town, perhaps a few hundred people, maybe 1,000 at most, within walking distance of Jerusalem's watchful walls. City of David, they called it. It held prophecy like a hidden ember. Micah 5 named it, a ruler to come out of Bethlehem. Origins from ancient days. That text did not sleep. Priests knew it by heart. Herod's scribes recited it without blinking when the inquiry came. Matthew records the scene. Foreigners arrive, Magoi from the east, court astrologers or scholar priests, likely out of Babylonian or Persian traditions, trained to read the sky like a library. They enter Jerusalem with one loaded sentence. Where is the newborn king of the Jews? Not a polite line, a political grenade. Herod felt the blast. Matthew says all Jerusalem felt it, because that phrase, King of the Jews, already had a claimant, and that claimant had soldiers. The story does not linger on polite introductions. Herod gathered priests and experts. He interrogated. He triangulated the prophecy to Bethlehem. Then he extracted a timeline from the Magi about when the star had first appeared. The mask never slipped in public. The calculus back in his chambers wrote a different line. The child would not live, but watch the layering. The Magi followed a star. Matthew's word is Esther. It rose. They saw it in the east. They traveled, and then it moved ahead of them and came to rest over the place where the child was. Astronomers have spent decades trying to decode this. Triple conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn in Pisces in 7 BCE, an eye-catching pairing of Jupiter and Venus in 2 BCE that created a brilliant point of light, a comet recorded in 5 or 4 BCE in Chinese chronicles. Jupiter's retrograde motion near the star Regulus in 3-2 BCE, painting a regal signature in Leo, a constellation royally charged in the ancient imagination. One line of research maps that December of 2 BCE stationary point of Jupiter in the southern sky, as viewed from Jerusalem, standing over Bethlehem's direction. Another line stresses that Matthew describes a supernatural guidance event, not an ordinary star doing ordinary things. First-century people had categories for both. The Exodus had its pillar of fire. Babylon had its planetary portents. The Bible does not blink at the idea that God can choreograph nature and surpass it. The vision of Revelation 12 unlocks the frame. The woman stands for Israel, radiant with God's covenant symbols, 12 stars for 12 tribes. End quote. The image layers further. She is Zion in labor, the community of God groaning to bring forth the Messiah, as Isaiah 66 and Micah 4 already sang. She is also, in the most literal maternal sense, Mary of Nazareth, the one who carried the child. The early church never felt obligated to choose between these layers. Israel's story and Mary's story intersect in one child. The dragon stands for Satan, the ancient serpent from Genesis 3, the accuser, the deceiver. John's imagery borrows from the deep reservoir of biblical and ancient Near Eastern dragon lore, Leviathan in the Psalms and Isaiah, chaos monsters that threaten creation, and it redeems the archetype to tell the ultimate story. A tyrant in a palace becomes a mouthpiece for a serpent in a cosmos-wide rebellion. Herod reached for a sword. The dragon craned its neck. Matthew does not mince words. Herod sent and killed all the boys in Bethlehem, and in all that region who were 2 years old and under, according to the time he had ascertained from the Magi. The grief had a name before it happened. Jeremiah 31:15, named Rachel weeping for her children. Ramah cried in the exile centuries earlier. Bethlehem cried in Herod's day. The innocent bleed. The dragon cheers. This is not a decorative story for greeting cards. This is an empire's rage, focused on a crib. Skeptics sometimes point to silence in Josephus about the Bethlehem massacre. The numbers matter. Bethlehem's population in the 1st century was small. Demographers who run the math estimate a few to perhaps a couple dozen male infants and toddlers in that age bracket across Bethlehem and nearby hamlets. In the scale of Herod's other brutalities, that grim episode would not have drawn special attention in Roman records. Josephus documents Herod executing his own sons and drowning the high priest Aristobulus. He records the plots and counterplots like a tragic chronicle. A targeted regional massacre of a small number would tragically fit his pattern without necessarily showing up in every surviving line of a historian's scroll. Absence from Josephus does not erase Matthew's testimony. Bethlehem kept the memory. The church preserved it with a cry and a date. The dragon in Revelation 12 fails to devour the child. The text telescopes the whole career of Jesus into a single decisive movement: birth, mission, cross, resurrection, ascension, all compressed into the phrase that the child was caught up to God and to his throne. The rod of iron comes straight out of Psalm 2, a royal psalm the early Christians applied to Jesus without blinking. The Messiah defeats the nations not with a sword drawn from a scabbard, but with a cross that breaks the back of accusation. John hears a voice in heaven booming the verdict: salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. The accuser has been thrown down. The saints conquer by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. The dragon falls and rages. That rage circles back on the woman and her other children, those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. The nativity flows straight into the life of the church under pressure. Back on the ground, Joseph dreams warnings. Matthew links the flight into Egypt to Hosea 11:1. Out of Egypt I called my son. Israel walked that line first. The Son of God led out from Pharaoh's grip by a pillar of cloud and fire. Jesus walks it again, recapitulating Israel's story in his own flesh. The parallels intensify the theme. Pharaoh ordered the drowning of Hebrew sons at the birth of Moses. Herod ordered the killing of Bethlehem's boys at the birth of Jesus. The dragon recycles tactics. God replays deliverance with a deeper victory in view. The timeline rests on real dates and arguments. Herod the Great died in 4 BCE, by the standard reckoning, shortly after a lunar eclipse and before Passover, according to Josephus. Antiquity 17.6.4, 17.93. A partial lunar eclipse occurred on March 13, 4 BCE, fitting the window. Some scholars, like Jack Finnegan and others, place Herod's death at 1 BCE, based on alternate readings, and another lunar eclipse in January of that year, which compresses the events in Josephus more tightly. The debate ripples into attempts to date Jesus' birth, whether around 6-4 BCE or 3-2 BCE. Luke's note about Jesus being about 30 in the 15th year of Tiberius. Luke 3:1-23 permits either range depending on whether one counts Tiberius's co-regency. The star discussion rides those same rails. None of this blurs the narrative's sharp edges. It adds texture. It tells you that this story planted its feet in verifiable soil. Revelation 12 also stages a war in Michael and his angels against the dragon and his angels. The dragon loses, is hurled down, and the kingdom is proclaimed. Daniel 10 prepared readers for this kind of behind-the-scenes conflict, with heavenly princes contending as earthly empires rise and fall. The New Testament does not imagine that the birth of the Messiah happened in a spiritual vacuum. The angelic songs in Luke glow with joy because another front line is closing in victory. David's city hears shepherds and skies. John's vision hears combat boots and the slam of a fortified gate closing behind a banished accuser. All of this rewrites how you see that manger. The animals, the swaddling cloths, the feed trough, those elements remain honest, but a throne and a war sit inside that one room. A sign in the heavens declared it. A killer king manifested it. A hounded family lived it. A river of blood cried out beneath it, both in Bethlehem and in later episodes when the disciples faced prisons and lions and crosses of their own. Now track the star again. Ancient audiences understood planetary motion as meaningful. Jupiter was the king planet. Regulus, in the heart of Leo, carried royal symbolism. Leo linked with Judah in some Jewish associations, because Genesis 49 called Judah a lion's whelp. The Pisces constellation got linked with the region of the western lands at times in Greco-Roman astrology. The triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Pisces in 7 BCE would have signaled a major royal arrival to astral watchers in the east. The 2 BCE Jupiter-Venus conjunction created a spectacular bright point. Scholars like Craig Chester and others have modeled Jupiter's retrograde pattern, noting how it appears to halt in the sky over the southern horizon, the direction of Bethlehem from Jerusalem. Another body of scholarship argues that Matthew's description points beyond astronomy to a special luminous phenomenon, because the star appears to move and settle in ways that exceed normal observation. In the biblical world, natural and supernatural are not enemies. The Creator writes with comets and with glory. A thread runs back to Genesis 3:15, enmity between the serpent and the woman, and between the serpent's seed and her seed. He would bruise the serpent's head. The serpent would strike his heel. Christmas does not cancel that prophecy. It accelerates it. Revelation 12 visually quotes it. The woman and the serpent meet again, and this time the child's destiny is thrown an iron scepter. The heel strike lands at the cross. The head-crushing blow lands at the empty tomb and the ascension. The dragon falls from heaven like lightning in the language of Jesus in Luke 10, and Revelation 12 expands that moment into a cosmic eviction with legal consequences. The accuser loses his standing. Herod's role in this is painfully human. He is not a cartoon. He is a tyrant making calculations under pressure. The title, King of the Jews, was not a metaphor in his ears. It was his. The arrival of Eastern dignitaries announcing arrival lit a fuse. The scribes who quoted Micah 5:2 put Bethlehem into the crosshairs. The Magi's timeline filled in the circle. The massacre becomes a brutal footnote in many retellings, softened or ignored in popular imagination, but Matthew locks it in. The Old Testament echo to Rachel's weeping shuts the door on denial. The early Christian writers heard the cosmic angle clearly. Justin Martyr, in the mid-2nd century, connected Herod's rage with demonic opposition to Christ. Irenaeus read the dragon's fury as the devil's roaring. Ignatius, on his way to martyrdom in the early 2nd century, wrote of the Virgin's hidden pregnancy as a threefold mystery known to God, concealed from the prince of this age, and manifested in a star. The Church breathed Revelation's air from its earliest days. The Nativity and the Apocalypse were not two different stories. They were two different vantage points on the same collision. Then there is Mary. The woman in Revelation 12 stands bigger than one person, wrapped in Israel's symbols. Yet the Church also saw her there, the mother who gave flesh to the Messiah. This is not an exclusive reading that erases Israel. It is a layered reading that honors both. Israel in labor and Mary in labor converge at one birth. The war focused on her not because of her personal power, but because of the child she carried. Catholic interpreters have emphasized this Marian angle for centuries. Protestant interpreters often center Israel as the primary referent and still acknowledge Mary's inclusion in the symbol. The text supports a both-and approach. The crown of 12 stars does not need to displace the mother of the child. It adorns the story of Israel raised on her head. Revelation 12 mentions the woman fleeing into the wilderness for 1,260 days, a prophetic time period of 42 months, 3.5 years, half of 7, the symbolic number of completeness. That stretch recurs across Revelation and echoes Daniel. Interpreters have offered options. Some read it as a symbolic picture of the entire age between Jesus' ascension and return, a time of protected vulnerability for God's people. Others link it to specific episodes, such as the Church's flight to Pella before Jerusalem's fall in 70 CE, as recorded by early Christian tradition. John's imagery is flexible enough to carry multi-level meaning. The key remains: God protects his people in the wilderness while the dragon rages without ultimate success. The Gospel writers never present Jesus as a victim of fate. Every step in Matthew's infancy narrative arrives with a footnote in the prophets. Bethlehem sits under Micah's promise. Egypt sits under Hosea's line. Rachel's tears sit under Jeremiah's lament. New Moses emerges under Pharaoh's shadow and outmaneuvers him. The dragon repeats its playbook. God writes a better ending. Herod's death rounds out one chapter. His sons split the inherited territories. Archelaus took Judea and Samaria and earned a reputation that sent Joseph and Mary to Galilee under God's guidance, to Nazareth, which lined up yet another prophetic thread. The title Nazarene echoes the prophets with a wordplay on branch, Netzer, tying to Isaiah's branch from Jesse. Matthew's pen keeps pointing back to older words fulfilled in newer ways. The story hums with continuity. At the same time, the tenderness of that night never disappears. Luke's shepherds look up into a sky that opens. The angel's message sounds like a trumpet of peace on earth. Glory to God in the highest. A baby wrapped and laid in a manger becomes a sign that God's royal strategy is humility. Majesty hides in smallness. The dragon misreads this. Power in heaven bends low on earth. That posture disarms the accusing logic of hell. The prince of this world has nothing in him. As Jesus later says in John, the manger is already a throne, because it unveils the kind of king this will be. The wise men kneel, lay out gifts, gold, frankincense, myrrh, textured offerings that tell a story. Gold fits a king. Incense fits a priest. Myrrh fits a burial. Matthew does not unpack their symbolism explicitly, but later Christian reflection folded their meanings into the larger arc. The Apostle John saw the temple theme in Jesus' body. The Epistle to the Hebrews saw the high priest theme in his intercession. The Gospels saw the burial theme in the myrrh and aloes that Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea used at the tomb. The newborn's identity bleeds through every detail. Matthew notably uses the word paidion for the child in the Magi episode, not brephos, which Luke uses for an infant. The nuance suggests the visit came months after the birth, perhaps up to 2 years, which aligns with Herod's timeline for the slaughter, based on the star's initial appearance. That detail turns the tableau from a barn scene into a house scene, as Matthew notes, a modest residence in Bethlehem to which the Magi came. The nativity sets move the magi and shepherds together for a single picture. The texts place them on a staggered timeline in the same sacred drama. Revelation's dragon remains central. 7 heads, 10 horns. The same configuration appears on the beast in Revelation 13, the empire-shaped monster that rises from the sea. The dragon lends the beast its power. In John's perspective, Rome looked like one more head on a long beastly succession. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. Earthly power plays dress as predatory animals when they push against God's reign. And will find you. Herod stands as a local embodiment of that system, a provincial beak in a larger eagle's shadow. The massacre in Bethlehem is small-scale compared to the Holocaust or other later horrors, yet it is the same kind of horror, a political decision to secure power through the elimination of a perceived rival. The dragon loves that logic. Revelation's imagery unmasks it. John writes Revelation near the end of the 1st century, according to most scholars, under Domitian, or perhaps earlier under Nero. He writes in exile on Patmos. He writes to churches that have already tasted persecution and compromise. He serves them a nativity viewed from the throne room. The infant's survival and ascension guarantee the church's endurance. The voice in heaven declares that the victory has already been won in principle. The dragon's rage is real but time-limited. The woman's flight is painful but protected. There is an artistic echo running in the background that 1st century audiences would not have missed. In the Greco-Roman world, stories about a mother pursued by a dragon as she gives birth to a divine child circulated with variations. Leto pursued by Python while giving birth to Apollo is one. John's vision does not baptize pagan myth. It rewires the genre to its true source. The symbols do not prove that the gospel borrowed its plot. They prove that the Creator wrote the desire lines into human storytelling and then fulfilled them with flesh and blood history in Bethlehem and Jerusalem. Herod's story ends with disease and decay. Josephus describes a gruesome death. The dragon's story ends with a chained humiliation and a lake of fire. Those endings frame the child's beginning. Bethlehem sits inside that frame like a lit candle in a black room. The light grows. The darkness rages. The light still grows. Now pull the lens even wider. Isaiah 9 sounded like a coronation, long before Bethlehem. A child born, a son given, government on his shoulders. Names that sound like thunder. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. The text sits in a chapter full of war boots and bloodied garments, and a deliverance that swallowed the yoke of oppression. That is the paradox. The Prince of Peace enters a war. He ends the war not by avoiding it, but by absorbing its last blow and seeding a new creation on the other side. That is why Revelation glorifies the Lamb who was slain. Power yields. Life dies and rises. The dragon cannot compute that math. Jerusalem felt the tremor of the Magi's arrival because the city understood rebellion and prophecy. The priests knew the scriptures. The power brokers feared the consequences. The Roman governor's office watched for anything that smelled like insurrection. In that climate, Bethlehem's baby was not just a baby. It was a claim. That claim echoed in 1,000 ways across the next 30 years. Crowds formed. Demons shrieked. Storms obeyed. Crosses lifted. Stones rolled. The cosmic clash did not end with a lullaby. It marched into synagogues, deserts, lakes, and courts. The legal dimension in Revelation 12 is razor sharp. The dragon is called the accuser of our brothers and sisters, the one who accuses them day and night before God. The casting down is a courtroom eviction. The evidence against God's people gets neutralized by the blood of the Lamb. That is why the Nativity points toward the cross, even in Matthew's early chapters. Myrrh sits next to gold. Threat sits next to glory. Egypt sits next to Bethlehem. The victory proclamation in heaven makes sense because the decisive disarming of accusation happens when the Messiah dies and rises. Paul says the same in Colossians, that rulers and authorities were disarmed at the cross. John paints the picture with dragons and angels because he wants you to feel the weight of what happened, not just file it as a theological note. The Christmas star glows as a sign of royal arrival, but its meaning deepens once you see the dragon snapping at its reflection on the ground. The Magi's journey becomes a picture of nations coming to Israel's light, as Isaiah 60 envisioned, kings to the brightness of your rising. Gifts flow, camels kneel. Darkness covers the earth, but glory rises. The Bethlehem massacre becomes a counterpoint, a shriek from the abyss, refusing to concede the field. Revelation assures the church that such shrieks will not have the last sound. Bethlehem's children do not vanish into abstraction. They have been remembered in liturgy as the holy innocents for centuries. Their cry is part of the story. Their mother's ache is part of the story. Rachel weeps, refuses to be comforted, until God answers with a new covenant in the very chapter Jeremiah gives the lament. New hearts, forgiveness written on the inside. The narrative refuses to let grief be ornamental. It honors it and then threads it into fulfillment. The woman in the wilderness receives wings like an eagle to flee. Isaiah promised the same to the weary. They would mount up with wings like eagles. Exodus promised eagle wings to Israel in the original rescue from Egypt. God bears his people out of reach, while the serpent spews water like a river to sweep her away. The earth helps the woman by swallowing the river. John loves Exodus echoes. Seas part. Earth cooperates. God provides cover. The details are not to be over-literalized. They are to be recognized as a declaration that no flood of rage can erase the people who carry the testimony of Jesus. Bethlehem included that kind of cover in miniature under a moonlit escape route toward Egypt. Herod dies. Rome keeps grinding. The child grows and asks no permission from Herod's heirs to speak about the kingdom. He heals. He forgives. He tells storms to hush. He stands before Pilate without flinching. He climbs a cross under a sign ironically that reads, King of the Jews, in 3 languages. Herod's descendants mock him in the trial narratives. The dragon still crouches in the shadows of that scene. The child, now the man, completes the story, Revelation 12 summarized. Ascension completes the arc of being caught up to God and to his throne. Pentecost replaces one star's guidance with a cloud of fire filling the church. Numbers like 260 days do not need to turn your head into a calendar maze. They function as a symbol of a limited time of tribulation, a time God measures and God ends. John sees the church living inside that measured season, faithful, often persecuted, always sustained. He writes to communities in Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. Some love well, some compromise, some suffer, some sleep. The dragon studies them all. The Lamb walks among their lampstands. Scholars sometimes map Revelation 12 onto the fall of Jerusalem in 70 CE, seeing the woman's flight as the church's escape and the dragon's pursuit as Rome's war. Others stretch the image across the centuries to include every epoch when the church had to run and resist. Diocletian's edicts, Soviet prisons, underground churches across lands where confessing Jesus costs everything. The point remains sturdy. Bethlehem began something that no Caesar has ever been able to stop. The dragon's 7 heads and 10 horns represent power structures, kings, empires, systems that chew people. The star guided Gentiles to a Jewish king whose reign did not imitate those horns. He did not devour. He fed. He did not accuse. He pardoned. He did not tear down the weak. He lifted them. Revelation's violent imagery never licenses human violence in imitation. It exposes the predatory violence of sin and empire and shows the Lamb's victory over it by self-giving love. That is not sentimental weakness. That is nuclear holiness detonated in a sinful world. Consider the poetic tension of Bethlehem and Herod, juxtaposed with Mary and Rachel. One mother rejoices over a child who will save his people from their sins, as Matthew's angel announces earlier. Another mother wails over a child ripped from her arms by the machinery of fear. Both mothers stand as witnesses. Salvation is not an abstract plan. It arrives amid blood and tears and flight, and a state apparatus that cannot recognize holiness when it hears it crying in a cradle. The Bible's accuracy includes names, places, and also theological cross-references that hold the story together. Bethlehem's geography matters. Egypt's border matters. Nazareth's obscurity matters. Revelation's symbols matter, because they do not float. They anchor to history even as they unveil heaven. This integration is why the Church throughout the ages keeps returning to the Nativity with awe. It is not just a precious beginning. It is the opening of a cosmic trial. The dragon loses its platform to accuse. The manger becomes a courtroom bench, turned into a mercy seat. Herod's successor, Archelaus, was such a threat that Joseph took the family to Galilee. As Matthew notes, the political map kept reorganizing under Rome. Quirinius's census in 6 CE reorganized Judea as a Roman province after Archelaus's deposition. Luke's birth narrative places the birth under an earlier census, a much-debated point with layers of administrative complexity. The ancient world did not run with standardized forms and online databases. Regional enrollments and military-based enumerations happened under different localized terms. Luke's phrasing about the first census, when Quirinius was governing Syria, can be read with a range of nuances. Scholars continue to debate. The presence of debate shows the text lives in history, not beyond it. The Magi's homage carries the drama beyond Israel's borders. Matthew loves that move. He ends his gospel with a commission that sweeps in all nations. He begins with strangers kneeling. Revelation ends with nations bringing their glory into the New Jerusalem. It begins with nations searching the sky for a sign. The cosmic clash at Christmas, therefore, includes a missional thread. The dragon wants nations calcified under idols and fear. The child draws nations to a light that tells the truth and sets slaves free. Michael's victory in heaven in Revelation 12 mirrors Jesus' healing ministry on earth. Demons cry out and depart. The heavenly prosecuting attorney loses his case and is thrown out. The Gospels and Revelation are not separate genres with unrelated content. They are two halves of a single movement. The Nativity is the infiltration. The exorcisms are skirmishes. The cross is D-Day. The resurrection is the raising of the banner over the enemy citadel. The ascension is enthronement. Pentecost is occupation. Revelation is the field report from the front lines and the final victory parade detailed in advance. This recoding of Christmas changes the posture of celebration. Carols become battle songs. Candles become signal fires. Gifts become offerings to a king who survived an assassination attempt at birth and dismantled the assassin's legal strategy forever. That kind of celebration stays joyful and sober at once. It honors the innocents. It honors the refugees. It honors Israel's story. It honors Mary's courage. It honors Joseph's obedience. It honors the Magi's hunger. It honors angels and shepherds who did their part in heaven and on earth. The story carries one more enduring word. Revelation 12:17 ends with the dragon going off to make war on the rest of the woman's offspring, those who keep God's commandments and hold fast to the testimony of Jesus. The child lived and ascended. The dragon switched targets. The church inherits the pressure. The Bethlehem story prepares the church for that pressure without despair. The star does not go out. It changes form into the Spirit's presence and the Scripture's guidance. The same God who moved a family across borders at night moves communities across centuries through crises. The world still has Herods, large and small. The dragon still throws tantrums. A lamb still reigns. One more detail matters for perspective. Revelation's dragon sweeps down a third of the stars with its tail. The symbol communicates scale. The rebellion is vast, yet 2/3 remain in place. God's sovereignty is not a fragile ornament. The odds never tilt against him. The image does not map into literal astronomy. It declares that the enemy's reach is terrifying but limited. The Bethlehem episode reads the same way. Herod's order cuts deep. It does not stop the story. Evil's claws leave scars. They do not write the last paragraph. The last paragraph belongs to a lamb who once fit in a manger and now fills heaven and earth. Bethlehem teaches humility, heaven teaches triumph, and Revelation stitches them together with a dragon's growl in the background, so the triumph will not feel cheap. The Nativity draws a line straight through Herod's throne room and Satan's courtroom and breaks both. The dragon waits at the crib. He ends with a slammed door in his face. The child's survival was not luck. It was promise. Micah 5 said the ruler from Bethlehem would shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, and that he would be their peace. The slaughter did not cancel that promise. The flight to Egypt did not delay it in defeat. The return to Nazareth did not bury it in obscurity. The star told the truth. The angels sang the truth. Revelation confirms the truth. The first Christmas carried a clash that explains why the world still shakes and still fills with hope. A dragon failed. A king rose. A woman was given wings. A people learned to sing under pressure until the sky itself would open for good.